And a real treat for me to have the Secretary of State of the great candidate for governor of Michigan on the line with us, Jocelyn Benson. Secretary Benson, thanks so much for joining us. I was born in Michigan. I grew up in Grand Rapids. I grew up in Lansing. Garland Gilchrist is an old friend of mine. Two of my brothers still live in Michigan, and I get back there from time to time. And it is just great having you here on the program with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm a big fan and really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
You have, first of all, of course, you're running for governor, and that's a fine thing, and we can talk about that if you'd like. But you also have a new book out, The Purposeful Warrior, Standing Up for What's Right When the Stakes Are High. And I found this just, it's sort of a part autobiography, part self-help book. I mean, it's remarkable. You open the book with the story of when Donald Trump lied about what you were doing, with the election in 2020, mailing out ballots. He claimed you ended up with armed people coming to your house. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, it was a harrowing night. As the state of Michigan's election chief, my job is to make sure every vote is counted and every voice was heard. And the 2020 election was really harrowing time where we saw firsthand how far forces were willing to go to block the will of the people if they didn't agree with them. And of course, we're seeing remnants of that now every day. But it was a really challenging moment for all of us because we had to stand up to the president of the United States as they spread lies about us and our work. And that night where people came outside my home, armed protesters who were, very clearly upset about the results and wanted to take it out on me and my family. I'll never forget what it was like to shelter in my home, protecting my child so that we, could, stay safe while people with guns protested outside my front door because of lies that they'd been fed about our elections. But, I still stood up to Donald Trump, speaking the truth, and we defeated that plan to interfere with the counting of valid votes and illegally block the certification of accurate election results, despite the escalation of that plan up to the tragedy at our U.S. Capitol on January 6th. So it was a defining moment for me, but it wasn't, it didn't come out of nowhere. I had started my career fighting for voting rights in Montgomery, Alabama, 20 years earlier. Yeah. And so I was ready for that moment. And the book really is about how we all can build a courageous life so that we could be ready for moments like that may come our way for standing up for what we believe in.
I mentioned I grew up in Michigan. I had in the 50s and 60s, I had a friend whose father was in the Michigan Militia. And so I knew some of these guys, and in fact, one time we went out in the woods with them where they were doing target practice.
Wow.
And one of my brothers lives up near Lowell, in a very rural area, and they're all over the place up there. How unique is that to Michigan? I've only, in the Midwest, I've only lived in Michigan. I live in Oregon now. But is this I realize, we've got right-wing militia groups all over the country, but it always seemed to me the Michigan militia and these other guys, like the guys who tried to kidnap and murder your governor, Gretchen Whitmer, that there was something about Michigan that was like these particularly virulent strain of homegrown crazies. Is Michigan unique in this regard?
Well, I started my career at the Southern Poverty Law Center, investigating white supremacists and neo-Nazi organizations, extremist organizations, anti-government organizations all around the country. And my investigations took me to California, took me to Pennsylvania, throughout the South. And so there was a common thread of folks who felt the economy had left them behind in various states where they perhaps saw the lack of economic prosperity for them or their family members, and that ultimately led them to extremism, to find a reason why. And when we see dips in the economy or challenging times where wages are stagnant and costs are rising, that can give rise to extremism all around the country, and particularly in rural areas. But the internet connects all of those areas too. So there's strains of it throughout not just the United States, but also I studied the international connections to the European strains of this type of extremism. And so it's something that I think we all have to take on together and battle together, and recognize that it can be oftentimes a divisive impact of economic stratification that leads many to start blaming each other. And, as you know, as a historian, this is rampant throughout history, and that sometimes manifests itself in a lot of the extremism and violence. And that's what I studied. It's harrowing, but it also really speaks to the need to make sure we invest in economic prosperity for all. And, we all do better when we all do better. And that's what I've tried to focus my career on, having seen those negative impacts of poverty and economic stratification and the remnants of that through my investigations.
You have had an extraordinary career. My sense of it back in the day, this was my wife's father was the Assistant Attorney General for the state of Michigan, worked with Frank Kelly, or for Frank Kelly, back in the 60s. And when we were teenagers, and her house was frequently being staked out by the state police because of the threats he would get, particularly when they were prosecuting some of these guys, the Licavoli crime family, for example. I remember very well. And I'm wondering to what extent do you think that this whole how the racial hate? My sense of the Michigan militia, when I knew them in the 60s, was that they were more about race, and they were all about this idea that government was an oppressive force. They were reading John Stormer, and they were into the John Birch Society and all this, that Fred Koch was funding, and all this kind of stuff. That was really what was driving it. But it seems today that now we've got stochastic terrorism. We've got this murderer in Minneapolis. The gun nuts have just gone crazy. Are things a lot worse now than they were back then? And if so, what do we do about this? I don't think this is just purely economic.
Yeah, certainly racism, anti-Semitism. There were reasons why these organizations are also linked to white supremacy movements and neo-Nazi movements, and have roots throughout our history of that too. What we've seen is, in what I've seen, is really a thread throughout history where that's that type of inequality, whether it's racial, economic, or rooted in other types of hate, really generate violence. And one of the things I saw quite clearly is that there's a direct link between hateful rhetoric and violent threats of leaders, and the actual violence that occurs in communities as a result of that ideology or of that rhetoric. And so we're in a moment right now where not just we're in an era of misinformation, where the access to quality and trusted information is more challenging than ever before, but that's combined with leaders who are using division and using cruel actions and corruption and chaos, chaotic decision-making and chaotic economic policies to really allow division to stoke our political discourse. And what we've uniquely seen in Michigan, I believe, over several years, has been that use of political rhetoric and falsehoods to create divisions that then do have a link to violent threats and violent acts. And that's what we saw in 2020. That's what we saw in the tragedies that played out in Minnesota. And that really has turned up the heat in this moment. But in addition to that, it is something that leaders can turn the temperature down on. Like, we all have a responsibility not just to condemn these political violence, but to make sure we recognize the link between this sort of hateful rhetoric that far too many politicians espouse these days, and the links between that rhetoric and the violent acts of those who hear that, because it's very real. I experience it personally on a regular basis, and it's quite harrowing. It doesn't deter me from doing my work, no less than it deterred the folks who stood at the foot of the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, and their work to march forward anyway, to fight for freedom freedom and to fight for our voting rights. So that's in my blood as well, to fight for that no matter what. But it doesn't make it any less scary. It just means we have to choose to be courageous and brave in the face of those fearful moments.
Amen. We're talking with Jocelyn Benson, the Secretary of State for the great state of Michigan and candidate for the governor of Michigan. And we have about 2 minutes before we're going to hit a hard break. I can't stop. I'd love to have you tell us about your candidacy, why you decided to run for Michigan governor, and what you would do as governor. Why you're, what do you think you bring to this?
Well, I'm the daughter of special education teachers, the wife of a combat veteran, and the mom of an 8-year-old little kid who in 10 years is going to be 18. And the work we do over the next 10 years is going to define his childhood, his future, and the future all across the state. I'm running for governor because I want Michigan to be the best place to be a kid, to raise a kid, and call home. But we aren't that right now. People are struggling. They are struggling to pay for childcare. They're struggling to buy a home in the community they want to live in. And everything, all the costs of everything continue to go up. So as Secretary of State, I know how to run state government well. I've run one of our state's largest agencies, saving residents time, saving them money, and making their lives easier, and then getting out of the way. And so as governor, I'll do the same, making government work well for everyone, and also being prepared to stand up for our economic prosperity, just as I've stood up to protect the rights and the freedoms of every Michigander in our state. I also come with a sense of urgency to get things done, and I believe that's what all voters, Democrats, Independents, Republicans together, want to see from their governor and their government, someone that fights for them and also makes their lives easier. That's
a great platform. Is Governor Whitmer term limited out?
Yes. She is term limited, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And people can go to my website, jocelynbenson.com, too, if they want to learn more or get involved in our effort.
Okay, and that's spelled Jocelyn Benson, like BENSON.com. Secretary Benson, I am so grateful that you dropped by today. It's a fascinating book. The book is The Purposeful Warrior, Standing Up for What's Right and When the Stakes Are High. And I wish you the very best in your candidacy. You'll make a great governor.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Big fan. Appreciate you having me on today. Really enjoyed you.
The door is always open to you.
Thank you.
Jocelyn Benson. The website again, jocelynbenson.com, and also on Blue Sky, Jocelyn Benson, BENSON. I'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this.